Every victim was missing a head. Some had it removed while they were still alive. The cuts were clean, confident, almost surgical. No hesitation marks, according to the coroner who examined them. Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut a human body apart. And for 4 years, in a city with one of the most decorated crime fighters in American history running the investigation, nobody could stop him. Kingsbury Run was a creek bed cutting through the poor side of Cleveland, lined with shanty camps locals called the Roaring Third. Transients slept there. So did people. The city had simply stopped counting. In September 1934, half a woman's torso washed up on the nearby lakeshore. No head, no hands. Investigators later called her the Lady of the Lake, and for a while she was just a strange, isolated tragedy. She wasn't isolated. A year later, 2 more bodies turned up in the run itself. Both men, both decapitated, both drained of blood and washed clean before they were dumped. One was identified as Edward Andrassy, a hospital orderly with a record of trouble. The other was never identified at all. Police treated it as a double homicide. Nobody used the word serial killer yet. That word barely existed in 1935. The victims kept coming from the same margins of the city: transients, sex workers, people living in shanties who wouldn't be reported missing by anyone because nobody was keeping track of them in the first place. That was part of what made the killer so hard to catch. He wasn't picking targets who'd be searched for. He was picking people the city had already stopped looking at. By 1936, they couldn't avoid it anymore. A third victim, Florence Polillo, was found in a bushel basket. A fourth, a man covered in tattoos, was found with such precise anatomical dismemberment that Cleveland's coroner assembled a private meeting. The press nicknamed the Torso Clinic. Police officials, psychiatrists, and pathologists in one room, trying to build a profile of a killer they couldn't catch. The city had a problem beyond the murders. Cleveland was mid-depression and desperate to look strong. The Great Lakes Exposition was set to bring millions of visitors downtown. A headless body story running in 3 newspapers every day was the opposite of the image the city wanted. That pressure landed on one man, Eliot Ness, the celebrity prohibition agent who'd taken down Al Capone's empire and was now Cleveland's public safety director. He hadn't been hired to chase a butcher. He'd been hired to clean up a corrupt, patronage-riddled police force, and by most accounts he was good at that job. This case was different. It couldn't be solved with raids and paperwork. The mayor needed him on it personally, and the newspapers needed a hero to point at. So Ness got involved, whether the case suited his skills or not. Police tried everything they had. They cross-referenced missing persons files. They sent fingerprints to the FBI and got nothing back. In a last, desperate attempt at identification, detectives made plaster death masks from the skulls of unidentified victims and put them on public display at the Great Lakes Exposition itself, the same event the city was so anxious to protect. Hundreds of thousands of fairgoers walked past the faces of the dead. Not one of them came forward with a name. Ness's team eventually zeroed in on a suspect, Dr. Tormey. Francis Sweeney, a World War I combat surgeon who'd amputated limbs on the battlefield and knew exactly how to take a body apart without hesitation. He lived near Kingsbury Run. He'd fallen into alcoholism and depression after the war. Ness had him brought in under an alias, Dr. Rhea X, and personally led an interrogation that stretched on for 2 weeks. Here's what most retellings leave out. Ness reportedly believed Sweeney was his man. He also believed he'd never get a conviction because Sweeney was a cousin of a sitting U.S. congressman, a political rival Ness couldn't afford to cross without risking his own career and the case itself. So instead of an arrest, something quieter happened. Not long after the interrogation, Sweeney checked himself into a veterans hospital. He stayed institutionalized, on and off, for years. If the theory is right, the man who beheaded at least a dozen people wasn't caught. He was simply filed away, safely out of reach of a trial that could embarrass the wrong family. There's a detail that makes this harder to dismiss as coincidence. One of Ness's own detectives, Peter Merillo, had spent years tracking similar dismemberment cases. They kept turning up along rail lines, stretching into western Pennsylvania. Merillo's theory was that the killer was hopping freight trains between cities. Sweeney had the surgical skill, the geography, and the psychological profile investigators had built. What he also had was a congressman for a cousin, in a city that had just spent years cleaning up political corruption. Quietly institutionalizing a well-connected suspect was a lot easier than putting his family name in a courtroom. With no arrest and bodies still surfacing, Ness ran out of patience. In August 1938, after 2 more victims were found close enough to see from his own office window, he led 35 officers into Kingsbury Run in the middle of the night. They rounded up dozens of men living there and burned the shantytown to the ground. The press tore him apart for it. Homeless men lost the only shelter they had, and police found no evidence connecting any of them to the killings. But after that night, the murders stopped. No more torsos. No more torso clinic meetings. Whether the fire scared the killer off, or whether institutionalizing Sweeney had simply taken him out of circulation at the same time, nobody can say for certain. A separate suspect, a bricklayer named Frank Dolezal, was arrested and pressured into a confession for one of the killings, then died in his jail cell before trial, under circumstances that were never fully explained either. Eliot Ness went on to publish his memoir and become a pop culture legend. He also died broke in 1957, his reputation never fully recovering from a case that outlasted his career. Francis Sweeney, meanwhile, spent the rest of his life sending Ness taunting postcards, some as late as the 1950s, needling the one man who'd come closest to catching him and never could. He died in a veterans hospital in 1964, never charged with anything. To this day, the Cleveland torso murderer is officially unidentified. At least 12 victims, possibly more, most still nameless. And the most unsettling part of this case was never the killer's skill with a blade. It's the idea that the investigation itself may have known who he was and chose to make him disappear quietly, rather than risk saying his name out loud. If a case like this can vanish behind closed doors in one of America's biggest cities, you have to wonder how many others never even made it that far. Subscribe if you want more of these cold cases dug back up. And if unsolved horror is your thing, go watch our episode on the Bloody Benders next.